I recently talked about how this oil cartel that's forming to kind of challenge OPEC could shake some things up here on the world stage. And one of the main things here is the oil consumption of the United States. I just want to take a look at where this is going here and look at the reality of the situation, where things sit, where they're going, looking at the expectation of future production and future production. Now, here recently, there's been a lot of talk about the oil game. There's been the talk that China has been trying to partner up with Europe and other individuals to form an alliance that could challenge OPEC, so to speak, with Saudi Arabia and Iran being some dominant players in OPEC. But then you look beyond oil. You look beyond what is being used today and where things are going, like toward electronic vehicles or electric vehicles, which Europe is a large consumer of. China is like number one when it comes to dealing in that department. And then Japan ranks at number one when it comes to making batteries. So you have to look at who would have the edge as we proceed into the future. And you have to take a look at where things are going to go in terms of oil consumption. So let's do that. Now, the U.S. seems to be assuming, and it's been safe to do this up to this point, but from here on out, I don't think so. The U.S. has been assuming that it's always going to have cars, trucks, and everything on the road in larger numbers than they did the year before. They take it for granted and see that we're just going to have more goods sold. We're going to have a larger economy. We're going to have more jobs. And of course, we have the world's most powerful military. And that's been the BAU model, so to speak, thus far. And it's largely worked throughout this whole past century, but not from here going forward. And the longer we try to pursue this, the more our future prosperity is at risk. And why? Well, it's because everything depends on energy, and more specifically, net energy. Having the world's most powerful military consumes a tremendous annual quantity of energy. The U.S. military alone, just the U.S. military, we're not talking about America, U.S. military eats up 100 million barrels of oil each year. Now, how can you go chalking up a fight with the one selling it or supplying it to you anyhow when it's your lifeline to keep your military going? Now, America's Department of Defense is the 34th largest consumer of oil in the world. Just the DoD, 34th largest consumer of oil in the world. In total, the U.S. consumes over 7 billion barrels of oil each year. 7 billion. And that represents only 37% of the nearly 100 quadrillion of BTUs that Americans are using in terms of energy consumption when you look at the BTU factor. The rest comes from natural gas, coal, other resources. And if you want to compare it, the rest of the world consumes 450 quadrillion BTUs worth. So America alone, 100 quadrillion. The rest of the world, 450 quadrillion. And world energy demand just keeps on growing year after year. The notoriously conservative EIA predicts that it will jump by almost 30% over the next 2 decades. Now, is our production going to be able to keep up with that? It's looking like it's not. In terms of where we're getting it. Now, a lot of people tend to think, oh, we have reserves this, we have reserves that. Someone may catch something on the mainstream, some bad information or some old information or this and that, and think that we may have vast quantities of reserves at our disposal when we don't have as much as many people think. And when it comes to the Arctic, Russia has been making all the moves necessary to lock down those territories. And what's China been doing? China's been doing everything in its power to lock down all the shoals, all the areas within the South China Sea so they can use it. So let's focus on just one of these crisis situations here. You're talking about the nations of the world have made regrettable decisions here in terms of our infrastructure. And that is making everything out of concrete with reinforced steel. Now, I want you to think about this for a second. We're talking rebar, mesh, all that. Because the steel rusts over time and they have no way to counter this and stop it, the concrete is busy being destroyed from the inside out. And you can see this across our country, coast to coast, on any infrastructure, bridges, anything like that, that's more than a couple decades old. It is literally creating a ticking time bomb. The world's crumbling concrete buildings, bridges, and roadways, they're going to have to be entirely replaced within a time span of 40 to 100 years of their original construction date. Where's all that energy going to come from when not a single administration wants to talk about it or wants to focus on that or redo any of it? When we all know an EMP or something from the sun could take out our grid, all of it is vulnerable. Now, you have to note China has just poured more steel reinforced concrete over just the past few years than the U.S. did in the entire 20th century. That is just a massive amount. And it shows you just how much China is consuming globally. So when we want to talk about this potential trade war, or what they're saying a trade war has begun, you have to look at some of the outcomes and where this can really go. It's the people that are going to suffer in the end. The Chinese, American people, Russian people, it doesn't matter. It's always the people in the end. You can look back at these times and think, hey, things were so good back at that point when the noose really starts to tighten. Now, we do have a lot of things that we could supply ourselves, but we depend on other countries for many things. Spices and fabrics and different foods and medicines. It's needed. Global trade is needed for every country's benefit. So when you start to break that apart and start to throw tariffs on everything and make it a nightmare, well, the end result's not going to be too good. Now, when we want to look at this, let me state some of these facts here in terms of the sand and make it clear to people. If you haven't heard this or got this too into your head yet in terms of the consumption of the concrete and what they're doing with all of that, the sand required for all the world's current concrete projects is now in very short supply. Can you believe that? Who would have ever thought that we could run out of sand? But they're talking about it. Just because you see sand on some beach somewhere doesn't mean, oh, we have sand. No. There's going to be a day where they could come, potentially want to come for that, for military use. If it came down to it, they would. If that was the last sand around and they needed to make some concrete structures, fortification, they would, without a doubt. But there's certain kinds of sand that they're using for this, and they're saying that it's in short supply. So you tell me how you're going to replace everything within the United States and China within the next 50 to 100 years. Where's the energy going to come from? Where's the sand and the supply is going to come from? There's going to have to be a shift, I guess is my point here, in the way we're consuming things. We live on a water world. We should be using that to our advantage so much. There should have been desalination plants up and operational decades ago. They had the ability, and they're still slow creeping to do it. We have to really want to save this planet and do some good. Solar, that sun, it's huge. But what was the very first thing that was attacked in this trade war? The very first thing that Trump ever came out and put a tax on in terms of China? Solar. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have a plan. I hope you have a plan where you and your family can get by if there ain't nothing else going on around you in terms of life. And I'm talking about growing your own food, your goods, having chickens, cleaning your own water, having ways to do it, collecting it, all legitimately, and having power. And solar is one of the top routes to go. Really, it is. To be able to utilize all that energy coming from the sun. We should have been doing it a long time ago, but you see, it's where the whole control factor comes back into play here globally. With the money they just keep on printing and the oil they've been using to control everything here. So when the price of oil goes through the roof, we have a problem. When it goes through the roof and it doesn't look like it's going to come back down, because the United States does not have enough oil alone to feed the military force that it's using around the globe. Something's going to have to give, period, in our consumption. And it will be quite a sight to see where this all goes in the next decade. Truly, by what they're targeting, the year 2030, for those of you that are still around, when that day comes, whatever system is dominant on this globe is going to be one to be reckoned with, in my opinion, because by that time, the carpet's going to have been pulled out from underneath so many. All the dominoes are going to fall, the different economies, everything else. And we're just as susceptible, if not the big main domino, to get all the rest of them to fall behind it. That ushers in a new system that I believe that they are patiently waiting to put into place. And all these things can't begin to happen until you tear down the old and you have something to replace it with. And I do believe they have that system created, tested, and ready to slowly roll it in and implement it. And I believe some of the things have already begun. So eyes open in terms of the global scene, these oil cartels, the control of the markets. Keep an eye on your precious metals. Right now, gold is down. It's something that I would take advantage of if you could. And just remember, those are things you're sitting on for a long time. Besides that, I'll leave a link here so you guys can read up on some of the other numbers and look at some of the other graphs here. And for those that would like to support my work and help ensure that I can continue to do this, I thank you. And you can find links below in the description box. And also make sure to subscribe to the other YouTube channel, Underground World News. Follow me on Twitter for the latest updates. And until next time, it's been Dabu7. Much love, y'all.